no. That's when Erin went back into the restaurant to wash her hands. Short video evidence of her poisoning her husband multiple times. Jack
and how she was taking off her roller skates in her driveway when a man approached her.
People are being poisoned in ways you would never guess. In August of this year, Erin Mims was celebrating her birthday with her husband at a Houston restaurant, and after returning to her car, she noticed a napkin on the door handle. When Erin saw the napkin, she thought that her husband was playing a prank on her. She didn't really think much of it, so she grabbed the napkin and threw it out and asked her husband if he had put the napkin on the door handle, and he said no. That's when Erin went back into the restaurant to wash her hands. Shortly after returning to the car, Erin began to feel a tingling sensation on her fingers, and after 5 minutes, her whole arm began to feel numb. Erin says she was having trouble breathing, she got hot flashes, and her heart began to beat really fast. Erin was quickly taken to the hospital, and after doing some tests, they told her that her vitals were all over the place. The doctor told her that it was an acute poisoning from an unknown substance, and the napkin situation may have been an attempted kidnapping. This dermatologist allegedly poisoned her husband, and he eventually found out. 45-year-old Emily Yu is a dermatologist, and her husband, 53-year-old Jack Chen, is a radiologist, and there's video evidence of her poisoning her husband multiple times. Jack claims that he began to feel ill in March, and he constantly noticed a chemical taste in his mouth when he drank his lemonade in the morning. He became suspicious of his wife and set up cameras in their kitchen and captured his wife pouring Drano in his lemonade. Jack went to the doctor because he was not feeling well, and they told him that he had 2 ulcers, gastritis, and esophagitis. Emily denied poisoning her husband and said that the false allegations are being used against her so that he has an advantage in their divorce case. Jack also said that during their 10-year marriage, Emily was not only abusive to him, but she was also very verbally and physically abusive to their kids. And this is the crazy part. When Emily was arrested, she actually called her husband, the same person that she tried to murder, to bail her out.
This is what happened to 24-year-old Giovanna Barrera and how she was taking off her roller skates in her driveway when a man approached her. Giovanna was born on October 23, 1996, and is from San Antonio, Texas. She has 2 younger sisters named Giselle and Destiny, whom she was very close to. Giovanna was known as Gigi to a lot of her friends and family, and they all describe her as a loving and caring person. She was enrolled at the Salon Professional Academy in San Antonio, Texas, and was studying to become a cosmetologist and esthetician. Even though Giovanna was very girly, she was also very active. She loved to work out, and she had recently began roller skating. On Wednesday, December 9th, 2020, Giovanna was hanging out at her grandmother's house and decided to go roller skating around the neighborhood while her grandmother finished cooking lunch. At around 2:30 p.m., Giovanna returned back to her grandmother's house and sat in the car in her driveway to take off her skates. At this point, Giovanna's grandmother walked outside to let her know that the food was ready, and Giovanna told her that she would be right in. The grandmother walked back inside the house to finish setting everything up, but then she realized that Giovanna was taking a long time. All Giovanna had to do was take off her roller skates and then come inside, so she didn't understand why it was taking her so long. As she was thinking this, her grandmother began to hear sirens. So she walked outside to see what was going on, and that's when she was approached by a police officer who told her to go back inside. She told the officer that she was out there looking for her granddaughter, and he told her to just step back because this was now a crime scene. Unfortunately, Giovanna had been shot and killed in her driveway. Her grandmother was in absolute shock. She didn't understand how this even happened. She didn't hear the gunshot, she didn't hear any commotion, nothing. 1 minute she was telling her granddaughter to come inside to eat, and then the next minute she was dead. So police start investigating the scene, and they talk to the neighbors to see if anyone saw anything. A neighbor did have a Ring doorbell, and they did capture a glimpse of what happened to Giovanna. This footage captured a man and a woman leaving the driveway in a vehicle similar to this. Thankfully, the footage did capture the license plate, and now police were on a hunt for them. Now, 2 days before Giovanna's death, a man had been violently robbed in broad daylight. He was out for a walk when a man and a woman approached him with a weapon and stole his phone, keys, and wallet. So, police were monitoring his bank accounts and credit cards to see if the thieves would use it, and they did. The suspects ended up using this man's credit card at a Quick Trip gas station, and when police went to go check the surveillance video from the gas station, they saw that the suspects were leaving in this car, the same one that was seen fleeing from Giovanna's driveway. Then, less than 48 hours after Giovanna's death, police tracked down the drivers and arrested 28-year-old Daniel Cavillo and 20-year-old Kayana Jones. and they revealed to police that they killed Giovanna over her cell phone. Yes, over a phone. So here's what happened. When Giovanna was sitting in her car taking off her roller skates, she had the car door open. As she was distracted doing this, Daniel and Kayana pulled up and Daniel got outside the car. Then he demanded Giovanna's cell phone. Okay, go to part 2. This is part 2 on what happened to 24-year-old Giovanna Barrera. So she was sitting in her car in her driveway when Daniel came up to her and demanded her cell phone. Giovanna told him no and then threw her cell phone under the seat of her car. And then, without any remorse, Daniel shot and killed her. Now, Kayana, who was still in the car, said that she heard the gunshot and then she saw Daniel running towards her. He got inside the car and told her what he had just done, and then they drove away. So she was basically the getaway driver. Now, the sheriff on the case has confirmed that Giovanna does not know these individuals and that this was just a random attack. These people were literally just out there in broad daylight trying to find someone to rob. So when they saw Giovanna sitting in her car with the door open, they decided to rob her. It's just crazy to me that they literally killed her over a cell phone. A lot of people wonder why Giovanna didn't just give up her cell phone, but you never know how you're going to react in that moment. Maybe her first instinct in that moment was just to throw her phone to the side, but at the end of the day, she should not be blamed for her death, and the only person responsible for this is Daniel. So Daniel was charged with capital murder and unlawfully carrying a firearm, while Kiana was charged with felony possession of a firearm, and there is a chance she could also be charged with capital murder. Daniel ended up taking a plea deal for a 40-year sentence, and his charge was lessened from capital murder to first-degree murder. He also received 10 years for aggravated robbery, and those sentences will run concurrently. He needs to serve half of his sentence before he's eligible for parole, and if he is released, he might get deported back to Mexico. Kayana has also agreed to a plea deal and will be sentenced later this year. As you can imagine, Giovanna's family was completely heartbroken by her death. They're so angry that these individuals just took her life as if she was no one. Over a cell phone, which is just even more aggravating. Her sisters gave a victim impact statement at Daniel's sentencing, and they said, "Giovanna will always be remembered as a hero for stopping someone like you from hurting other innocent people out there. You took her life like she was no one. She will always be remembered as our hero." One of Giovanna's sisters, Giselle, actually had a baby and named her son Giovanni after Giovanna. She's heartbroken that her son will never get to meet her aunt, but she knows that she's watching over them. So as I mentioned in part 1, Giovanna was studying at the Salon Professional Academy and she was set to graduate in May of 2021. They ended up having a memorial for Giovanna in front of her locker and they let her graduate posthumously. Giovanna had so much to live for, she had so many dreams to accomplish, and she was only 24. She was just out there minding her own business, roller skating, exercising, and then this happened to her. It's just absolutely heartbreaking, and her family wants to share her story and continue to spread awareness. They want people to be more aware about this type of violence and how it can happen anywhere at any time. My thoughts and prayers go out to the family, and may Giovanna rest in peace.
Do not watch this video if you're home alone. This is the horrifying and still unsolved case of Mr. Cruel. In 1991, 13-year-old Carmine Chan was babysitting her younger siblings in Melbourne, Australia. At around 9 p.m, she went into her kitchen to find a man masked with a large knife. The mask was incredibly distinctive, with white stitching around the eyes and the mouth. He locked her younger sisters in the cupboard before dragging Carmine out onto the street and vanishing. A year later, unfortunately, her remains were discovered. She'd been unalived and left in bushland. Unfortunately, she was not the only victim of this masked killer. He was nicknamed Mr. Cruel by newspapers and was a S offender. He's believed to have kidnapped and S-a'd around 12 children. One of his other victims, 10-year-old Sharon Wills, was actually at home with her parents when he broke in. He tied the parents up and disabled their phones. He taped Sharon's mouth and kidnapped her. Although assaulted and obviously traumatized, thankfully he released her. He also kidnapped Nicola Linus and after a 50-hour ordeal released her as well. And the most shocking thing about Mr. Cruel is that his identity is still unknown. As far as we know, he's still alive and walking around to this day. At the time of offending, he is believed to have been roughly around 35 to 40 years old with sandy coloured hair. He is believed to have been located roughly around the area of Melbourne's Tullamarine Airport. If still alive today, police believe he'll be roughly in his 60s and still living in Melbourne, Australia.
Today, August 30th, marks the 9th anniversary of Bryce Laspisa's disappearance. In August 2013, 19-year-old Bryce Laspisa was starting his sophomore year of college at Sierra College in Northern California. Bryce's friends started noticing some odd behaviors from him, like him being very paranoid, so they called his parents to let them know what was going on. His parents were concerned for his well-being, so they decided that they wanted him to drive home. His home of Laguna, California was about a 7-hour drive from Sierra College. But the next morning, Bryce still wasn't home, and his parents got a service request at a rest stop called Buttonwillow. They're able to get in contact with somebody at that service station, and the person says that he had filled up Bryce's gas tank a few hours earlier. But he says he'll go check for him, and he finds that Bryce was still there. He had been sitting in the same exact spot for 3 hours. So finally, Bryce's parents got a hold of him, and he said, okay, I'll get on the road and I'll be home soon. A few hours later, Bryce was still not home, so his parents, concerned at this point, contacted the police. They were able to get the phone company to do an emergency trace of his cell phone that found that his phone was still sitting at that same location in Buttonwillow. He had still been there for hours and hours and hours. His parents then asked the police to go do a wellness check on him. So they did. They were able to find him, and he was still at that same Buttonwillow rest stop. They did a sobriety test on him, and he was sober, and his behavior seemed normal to them. So there was nothing more they could do, and they encouraged him to once again call his parents. He talks to his parents again and says that he's going to get on the road, but a few more hours go by and he was still sitting at that same rest stop. And that same serviceman from earlier that his parents spoke to actually called his parents back saying he's still here. This serviceman then gets in his car behind Bryce and basically follows him onto the highway. By this point, it's the next night, and Bryce is finally on the road. So he calls his parents again, and they are asking him where he is, what landmarks he can see, so that they can get an idea of when he'll be home. But he pretty much says it's too dark for him to tell, but that his GPS was telling him he was going to be home by 3 a.m. But just after 2 a.m., his parents got another call from him saying that he was too tired to keep driving and he was going to pull off the road for the night. But a lot of people find this very bizarre because if he was supposed to be home by 3 a.m., he must have been very close to home at this point. The final call from Bryce to his parents went out at 2:09 a.m., and that was the last time anyone spoke to or heard from Bryce. 6 minutes later, Bryce's car was seen on security camera veering off the highway. It seems like he is speeding through rough terrain and going towards a cell tower, but there's no apparent reason why he veered off the road. Go to part 2. This is part 2 of the disappearance of Bryce Laspiza that happened 9 years ago today. So Bryce's car was seen on security footage veering off the highway. And then a few minutes later, it is seen again on security footage before it is not seen on any video for the next 2 hours. Around 5:15 a.m., Bryce's car went off the side of the road, down a ridge, and tumbled. The next morning, his car was found with the window kicked out and all of his belongings gone. But there was no sign of Bryce anywhere in the surrounding areas. Police did several searches for Bryce, including using trace canines, and they tracked his scent for quite a ways where he would have walked on foot. But at some point, his scent just disappears. That could mean that he got into a car or something else. And despite multiple searches over the years, no sign of Bryce has been found anywhere. Some people speculate that he could have gotten a head injury from the crash and maybe couldn't remember who he was, or that he met with foul play. But no matter what happened, his family is left 9 years later still wondering.